Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the NADTC webinar, Every Ride Counts campaign. We're very excited that you could be with us today. A couple of webinar logistics before we get started, and I turn the session over to your presenters. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, and what this means most importantly is that anything that you put in the chat section will be public and will be available with the archived recording when that's made available to the public. So just keep that in mind as you participate. Next, to ask a question, you have a couple of options to do that. You can either type it into the chat box, which is at the left of your screen at the very bottom, or if you are participating by phone only, then you can respond to the email that contained your connection information. I will get that email directly, and I'll make sure and copy and paste that email into the chat box so that the presenters will have that at the end of the session. So you can either post your question in the chat box on the bottom left of your screen, or you can respond to the email with your connection information with your question. Either way, we will make sure that we present the question to the instructors for today. As a side note, as I mentioned in the connection information, you have two ways to participate today. You can either participate via webinar room and phone, or just by phone. But what we do ask is that you at least dial in on the phone for your audio instead of just using the voice over internet with the webinar room. The audio connection and quality is much better over the phone, and so we do ask and suggest that that option at least be something that you utilize instead of just listening over to your computer speakers. You'll get a little bit of a better experience that way. In addition to that, we do have captioning available today. You can access that by either pressing the CC icon, clicking on the CC icon at the top left of your screen, or you can press Control plus F8 on your keyboard. Either way, that will bring up a separate captioning box that you can customize to your liking with regard to size and font, whatever would be better for you. If you're on the phone and would like to join by Blackboard webinar but are unable to do so because of a technical difficulty, then you have a couple of options. You can either call the Blackboard Technical Assistance line, which is 877-382-2293, or you can respond to your connection instruction email, and I will be looking for those and can assist you if you're having trouble with that. My name is Kristy McLaughlin, and I'm happy to help you if you're having any trouble in that way. So with that, I'm happy to turn the session over to our presenters to get started, and I'll turn it over to Virginia Dye, who is the co-director of the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. Virginia? Virginia, I don't think we can hear you. If you're on mute, you might need to unmute yourself or press star 6 or pound 6 to unmute yourself.
How is this, Kristy? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's a snowy day in Washington, and we're calling in from our various homes because the federal government has shut down, and N4A, which is where I work, follows federal government rules. Before I get started on the presentation, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. This is a session about our Every Ride Counts campaign. NADTC, for those of you who may be less familiar, is a partnership between Easter Seals and N4A, the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging. We're funded by the Federal Transit Administration, and our overall mission is to work with communities nationwide to increase the availability and accessibility of transportation, particularly for older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers. So I'm going to start this afternoon by talking about how we decided to embark on this effort. So in 2017, NADTC, and you may have gotten the slides earlier, in which case there was a different order for the slides, so I apologize for that. I made that change just today. So all the slides are the same. They are unchanged. It's just that the slide I'm on right now was farther down the chain in the original set of the PowerPoint. So in 2017, NADTC decided to form an expert panel to address the issue of information and technical assistance that's available locally for people on transportation. And we did that. One of the things that propelled us to do that is that N4A actually runs the Elder Care Locator, which is a nationwide toll-free number, which receives calls from older adults, fewer calls, but calls nevertheless from younger adults with disabilities, from family caregivers, and from professionals in the field about a wide range of aging issues. And for the last several years, transportation has been the #1 reason why people call. We also, through the NADTC, we have a toll-free number, which is listed on the final slide of this PowerPoint presentation. And that toll-free number has always generated far more calls from people calling for rides who have found us on the website somewhere, or somebody has told them about our center, which is primarily created to serve the needs of professionals and organizations that work on transportation for older adults and people with disabilities. So we are not set up to particularly serve the needs of people seeking rides. But what we do, because we have a relationship with the Elder Care Locator, is we're able to get those calls very quickly over to the locator. So those two issues have, and they've been steady. On average, I'd say every month we get between, the Elder Care Locator gets between 2,000 and 3,000 calls on transportation. That varies a little bit. And the NADTC line also gets these calls anywhere from maybe 150 to over 400 calls in a quarter, a 3-month period, that come to us from people seeking rides. So we know that for the most part, when people are calling for that kind of information, they're calling because, one, they don't know where to call in their local community, or two, they've tried to find the information, they've gotten frustrated, and they saw one of these nationwide toll-free numbers, and they've called. And there are a number of other places where people call with the same kind of issues. For example, the Medicare line also gets a lot of calls about transportation because some people think that Medicare provides a transportation benefit when, in fact, typically it does not. So we put together an expert panel to help us explore this issue, to come up with some possible way in which we at the NADTC might be able to address it. And you see on the slide a list of the members of that expert panel, and you see a wide variety of folks. It isn't a big panel, but it includes folks like Billy Alton from April, which is the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living. Sherry Clark, who works at the U.S. Administration for Community Living, has been for many years the project officer on the Elder Care Locator. We include Patrice Ernest, who is the director of the locator. And we also have representatives from public transit, including Sarah Green with the Rapids, and Chris Lyon from Lane Transit. We also included a representative from a 211 program, which is one of the local places where people call for a wide variety of information. That's Tom Page, who at that time was with Michigan 211. And then we had Carrie Porter, who's with the Greater Wisconsin Area Agency on Aging. And Carrie Porter does a lot of work with mobility managers around the state of Wisconsin, has a lot of involvement in transportation as well as in volunteer services. And finally, we had Nanette Relay, who's with the National Association of States United on Aging and Disability, or as I call it, NASWD, which is one of the variety of pronunciations for that acronym. And Nanette works on providing support and technical assistance to local aging and disability resource centers, as well as the aging information and referral assistance lines that are mandated under the Older Americans Act. So I hope you see from this list of folks that we really wanted to cover the waterfront, if you will. Kristy, let me see if I can get this slide to move on. It doesn't seem to be moving, so Kristy, could you move my slide? Thank you. Sorry about that. I am the least technologically able person on my staff, so I apologize for that. So the expert panel really grappled with the questions that are on the slide. So how do people in the community know where to go for transportation information? And how do they usually find information, not just about transportation, but what are their usual methods for seeking information when they need it? And particularly, how do older adults and people with disabilities of all ages get that information, as well as family caregivers? And finally, what can we do to help them find the right place when they need it? So this formed the background of our discussion. Next slide. We also address some of the issues that people are likely to encounter or that local services attempt to address. And by local services, I mean the public transit agency, a one-call, one-click if there is one in the community, a mobility manager if there is one in the community. Those lines that I mentioned, the aging and disability resource centers, toll-free numbers that are frequently operated by area agencies on aging or centers for independent living that run information and referral programs, the 211 programs. So how do you ensure on the issue of transportation that the information is consistent and also comprehensive? Because in some communities, it's necessary to really call around to get a full picture of what's available. There's also the function of all those programs that I just listed of educating callers and ensuring that the next time they're seeking a ride, they know where to go. And that's truly one of the things that when calls go to the elder care locator and they're then sent to the local agency that may be one of the ones that I listed, that folks not only get the information and the assistance that they need, but they're also getting enough information so that the next time they're seeking a ride or seeking information about transportation in the community, they have a better sense of where to go. There's also the issues for many people of overcoming their fear, particularly related often with public transit, the stigma that may be attached to those services for some people who think of it as, oh, that's the service that is meant for people who are younger of low income, for example. And also misperceptions. People have certain ideas about riding the bus, but some people who have arrived at the ripe old age of 65 and have never ridden a public bus may have not just fears and concerns about what their neighbors will think, but also they have a lot of misinformation that they've collected over the years, and they don't necessarily understand the service. So this is something that any center or any place that is intended to serve the needs of older people and people with disabilities around transportation really needs to be aware of. And finally, helping people find those options that meet their need. As I'm sure everybody on this call knows very well, just because you've got a decent array of good transportation services in the community doesn't mean all of those services will serve people who have certain kinds of disabilities or who are older, who may need some help, additional help besides just a ride, who may need help getting in and out of the car or vehicle, who may need someone to travel with them. So it's important that the needs of the individual get matched with what is available. Next slide. So this past year, moving on with this work, so we began at the end of our work with our expert panel, we began to work on the campaign that we're going to share with you today, the Every Ride Counts campaign. We ran into some glitches and some difficulty in helping make sure that it would work the way we expect it to work, and we'll be talking about that during this webinar. But we also realized as a center, and this is an issue that goes beyond the topic that we're talking about, but it's also, I think, a critically important issue that we were aware of. So we felt that there was a need for a national survey, but a national survey that would actually go to riders and potential riders of transportation themselves, rather than a survey of the folks who work in this field. Because while we all think we have, especially those of us who've been with this field for a few years, we think we've got a pretty good handle on what the needs are, and probably we're right. We've certainly done our background reading and research, but we felt that the time had come to really take a good look at what's going on out there in the field, particularly for older adults, age 60 and older, younger adults with disabilities, age 18 to 59, as well as family caregivers who care for both older adults and people with disabilities. So NADTC hired a research firm, KRC Research, to conduct this national quantitative survey of these three audiences. That survey was conducted last fall, and if you have a copy of the slides, you can click on where it says NADTC National Survey 2018 and get directly to the full report on the survey, and I do encourage you to do so. Last week we had a webinar that was focused on providing some survey highlights and some of the major findings of the survey. So that is going to be posted on our website shortly. The recording actually will be posted. But today I just want to share a couple of data points that I think are relevant to this discussion. So first of all, I want to just say that with the older adults that we surveyed, we did 200 of those surveys by telephone and 309 online. With the younger adults with disabilities, we did 100 telephone surveys and 413 online. And we actually surveyed 627 family caregivers or neighbor or friend caregivers. And these included 390 caregivers of older adults and 237 caregivers of younger adults with disabilities. Next slide. Oh, and I should say, with regard to the folks that we surveyed, that the research firm KRC Research also ensured that the people who were surveyed were representative of the overall population as found by the census. So older adults represent older adults who are reported on in the most recent census figures. And also, just so you know, it included, the older adults included 33% of older adults who have a disability that impacts their physical activity, their hearing, and or seeing. And that's the definition of disability that we use throughout the survey for younger adults with disabilities as well as older adults, that it affects physical activity, hearing, and or seeing, recognizing that some people may have multiple disabilities. Next slide. Okay, so what I felt was a significant finding of this poll is that there was no single go-to information resource that the folks who responded to this poll knew about with regard to transportation. And that, for better or worse, that when people are seeking this kind of information, most older adults and younger adults with disabilities tend to turn to family and friends for information and assistance. Next slide. So this is some of the results in detail, and I want to point out a couple of things about this data. One is family, friends, and colleagues, as I said earlier, is the most frequent source of information. But also, one of the, I think, interesting findings is that 24% of older adults, not that many, but about a quarter, and about a third of younger adults with disabilities are then turning to the computer for information and assistance. But what I find really daunting about this survey is that, for the most part, these organizations that you all are aware of, many of you all work in, the enormous amount of effort and investment that has been made to ensure that people know where in the community that they can go to get information, not necessarily just on transportation, but for example, only 13% of the respondents, both younger and older, said that they go to area agencies on aging. Only 8% of older adults and 12% of younger adults with disabilities go to centers for independent living for this kind of information. Aging and disability resource centers fare a tiny bit better. 16% of younger adults with disabilities and 11% of older adults check in with them for information about transportation. And look at the bottom of this survey, and this, I think, is really distressing, because we know that mobility managers do a tremendously good job, an important job. It's a critical role in ensuring that people know what information, what kinds of transportation is available to them in their community, helps them match their needs with the services that are available, and also critically important, because of where they sit in the community, whether they work for public transit or they work for an area agency on aging, a center for independent living. We know that mobility managers work in a lot of different settings. Only 2% of older adults had actually recognized that a mobility manager might be able to help with this. And not that many more, 8% of younger adults with disabilities were turning to mobility managers. Next slide. The next slide shows a similar result, and this is the result for caregivers who themselves rely on family, friends, or colleagues mostly to get this information. There are a few differences, but mobility managers, once again, are at the bottom. ADRCs, Aging and Disability Resource Centers, are at 16%. Centers for Independent Living are at 11%. Area agencies on aging, which typically run the aging and information referral hotline in their community, 15%. So it's not a very encouraging picture of what people know. And again, the people who responded to this survey are meant to be representative of the overall population. They're not necessarily those people who have been seeking information about rides. And one of the other things that's very clear from the survey is that most people who responded, whether they're older or younger, are traveling around their communities in cars, whether they are driving themselves still or whether they're riding with family and friends. So many of the respondents have not sought other kinds of transportation to meet their needs. Next slide. And finally, this is the last slide I'll show from the poll. We also found that many of the respondents do have internet access. 86% of older adults and 90% of younger adults with disabilities have a computer or have access to a computer. 69% of older adults and 87% of younger adults with disabilities have access to a smartphone. And I think it's really important. They also are users of social media, as you can see on the right side of the slide. It's important to remember this and to keep in mind that over time, the percentages are likely, we hope, to go up. So it's important as we're thinking about getting the word out on transportation, even if we're targeting an older or a frailer population, a population that may not be perceived as having access to the internet. It's important to keep this in mind in the methodology that we use to ensure that we aren't missing anybody. When we decided to do the poll, our initial thought was we wanted to do all of the surveys of older adults and people with disabilities by telephone. We had a time crunch that we had to adhere to, and so we weren't able to do all of them by telephone, but we recognized that we had to do a combination to ensure that we got responses from a representative group of folks. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn to the Every Ride Counts campaign. So the details of the Every Ride Counts campaign, I want you to know, was developed in partnership with the expert panel whose members I shared with you earlier. This is intended to be a national publicity campaign for local communities or regional communities or state communities to use. It is not something where NADTC is going to be sending out messages far and wide and hoping that they get printed in your newsletter or in your local newspaper. Rather, our hope is that we will be working very closely with local communities around the country that voluntarily decide to participate in this campaign. We want to help local communities do what they're already doing, but hopefully give them some tools that will support that effort to ensure that older adults people with disabilities and caregivers living in your community are made more aware about the availability and accessibility of the transportation options that your community offers. The campaign can be accessed via the website at the bottom of the slide. And our materials include the possibility of creating postcards, flyers, posters, as well as social media messages, all of which can be customized with local contact information. Next slide. Instructions are provided on how to add your local contact information. Login is required to download the campaign materials, and we do that for a couple of reasons. One is that the login will enable us to track who's using them, or who at least has been interested enough to download our materials or to log into the system. And also, it allows us to reach out to you and find out whether this is working as we perceive. This is new territory for us, so we don't know that this is going to be successful. We think we're on the right track, but we might not be. And we recognize that a lot of programs have developed their own materials that have been very successful over the years. We're really hopeful that our materials can either supplement what you're already doing or enable communities that maybe don't have a lot of printing resources, a lot of funding that will support the development of a logo or something that is meant to promote your program, that you can use our materials and we can support your efforts in that regard. Included in the materials is an infographic that explains the modes of transportation that may be available. And we've gotten a little feedback on the infographic and are going to be making a few changes. One is that we here at NADTC are going to be printing multiple copies of the infographic and sharing those at conferences and workshops that we go to around the country. But in addition to that, we're going to make a few changes in the infographic that will allow local programs to customize, just as they can with the other materials, to customize the infographic to work for them. Next slide. So these are 8 campaign messages. These are the campaign messages that we developed with our expert panel, and we decided from the outset that different programs, different communities are at different places, and they're trying to get a different message across. For example, one of the key messages may be to get information out about transit and to encourage a broader group of people to use transit. So there are some messages, particularly the first one, that says, "Tried transit lately, you'd be surprised how easy it is." The other thing is to recognize that people don't just want to get a ride someplace. Sometimes they desperately need to get somewhere. So the message about need to get somewhere, it's easier than you think, was designed. But the third one is designed to really encourage people to go where they want to go. We know that social isolation is a deadly disease, and it can seriously impact the life and well-being and health and mental health of older adults and people with disabilities who are stuck at home. So hopefully people will recognize that transportation resources can help them not just get where they need to go, but also get where they want to go. Or you have places to go. We can help you get there. So as you can see, it's a wide variety of messages that are both designed to help people recognize transportation as something that can make their lives better, as well as transportation offers services that can really help them do what they need to do. The next slide. This is what our campaign looks like. This one is blank. It has the NADTC logo on it and some brief information at the bottom about it. And there is a square there that allows you to put in your own logo and local contact information. That's true whether you use the one on the left or the one on the right. Next slide. And this slide shows you a mock-up of a couple of these materials that include a logo from Mountain Empire Older Citizens in Southwest Virginia. They graciously allowed us, as we were developing these materials, to put in their own logo so that you can see what they would look like with your own logo. Hopefully, they look attractive to you and they look like something that you might be willing to use. We have a number of various images that you can use for any one of these messages. Next slide. And this is a picture of John Lackney. He is the Director of Communication at RIDE ATA, which is the Area Transit Authority of Central Pennsylvania. John Lackney really likes our materials. I'm just as pleased as I can be to be able to say that. And so they had a project underway to wrap their buses, and he decided to include the Every Ride Counts campaign on that bus wrap. And on their website, the little, I guess, whatever it is, I don't know what to call it, the little band at the bottom of this slide is on their website, and as a way to encourage people in their community, which is highly rural in the central part of Pennsylvania, to know about the ride options that are available there. So we want to thank John particularly for his willingness to share his photos with us and his enthusiasm. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joellen Liddell. Joellen is the Director of Communications at the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging, and she has really been a partner with NADTC as we have embarked on this journey and worked to develop materials that would be those pleasing and useful to communities around the country. So with that, I think we're ready for the next slide, and we'll turn it over to Joellen.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Virginia, for that great introduction to not only the poll, but also to the campaign. And as everyone heard from Virginia, the messages that we included in the Every Ride Counts campaign were carefully vetted by both NADTC, but also by the expert panel that Virginia described a little bit earlier. One thing that you'll see that I hope you see throughout all of the campaign materials as you get used to, as you download them and access them on the NADTC website, is that we really tried to incorporate a lot of sentiments that we knew existed about transportation, and that we wanted to approach those and make transportation and transit seem approachable and accessible to people who may have some sort of hesitance or reluctance to try it. So the several messages and images that we featured in the campaign are really intended to convey to multiple audiences, people with disabilities, older adults, caregivers, the breadth of the options that are available in communities around the country, but also the accessibility of these options. We really wanted people to understand that transit, all of these transportation options that are out there, are accessible, and there may be a little bit of a barrier to use, but once you get where, they do help you get where you need to go. So we definitely try to tackle those objectives with the campaign. Now, really, the campaign, in addition to providing materials to agencies that they can use in the communities, we really tried to address two problems that NADTC and the expert panel identified as something of a barrier to increasing the number of older adults and people with disabilities who use mass transit. The first issue for many was just that they didn't know where to look to find information on the modes of transportation that are available to them. You saw that in some of the poll results that Virginia discussed earlier, but these poll results show that caregivers are often the ones who are tasked with either finding or arranging or doing the transportation themselves for their loved ones. So we wanted to make sure that caregivers knew exactly what options are available to them in the community around the country. So another issue that we wanted to address with the campaign that Virginia did mention a little bit earlier is stigma and some kind of misinformation that exists about mass transit. Sometimes people think that, oh, you know, it's too hard for me to try this, or, you know, I don't need to try mass transit. I've got my caregiver. I've got someone to take me to where I need to go. But one thing we really did want to convey is that using these transportation options conveys a sense of independence for people. So rather than being somewhat of a barrier, these transportation options provide independence. So we wanted to convey that. And you'll see that from a lot of the images and some of the images that you see right now on the slide. So we wanted to reinforce that notion that transportation options are accessible and easy to use for everyone in every community. And I hope that that is what we did. So I'm going to try to switch to the next slide. So let me see if I can do that myself. And I did. So on this slide, what we really have talked about, or what I really want to address and sort of dig deep into, is the how we measure the campaign. As Virginia mentioned, everybody, in order to download the materials, everyone needs to register on the website in order to do so, and that allows us to find out, again, who has downloaded the materials, but it also provides us the opportunity to connect with you and to get your feedback and your just information on how the campaign worked for you. So once you have downloaded and customized the materials in the campaign, we will ask you to tell us a little bit about the metrics and how the campaign worked for your community. And on the screen here, you'll see that just a few of these metrics include an increase. Has there been an increase or a decrease in the number of inquiries received on transportation options? Have the number of travel trainings you all have provided, have you seen a difference in those numbers? And a difference in the number of rides that are provided in your communities. All of these things will give us feedback in terms of how the campaign has worked for you in the community, but how we can improve any of the materials that are available. One thing that I will also say is that, as Virginia mentioned, the materials are available for download on the NADTC website, but they're also available in a variety of options. We wanted to make sure that everybody is covered in terms of their technological abilities. So we have everything provided to you in Microsoft Word, Adobe Acrobat, or InDesign, which is a popular design program. There are instructions in the materials that you will download that will show you how to, or that provide instructions on how to customize the materials by adding your agency's logo and contact information and all sorts of things. And as Virginia mentioned, we will be updating the infographic in the future, so that will also allow another opportunity for you to customize and use that in your communities as well. Now, if you have any problems downloading or customizing the materials, just let us know. We've done everything we could to make it easy for you, but we may have missed something, and we definitely want to make sure that these materials not only get into your hands, but are also into the community and are out there so people can see them and use them. What I would say is, use materials anywhere you would. The same place that you would use your promotional materials that you use to promote any programs that your agency has, please use them. So it's really in newsletters, in the mail, on your website, on social media, in local publications. And I mean, if this might be useful for smaller communities, but let the media know that you guys are starting a campaign and on transportation options. And oftentimes, smaller publications will publish those things because, you know, they're always looking for content too, and if it's a great resource for the community, it'll be very helpful for them too. Then, as far as measurement, again, I've gone to the number of inquiries received, travel trainings provided, anything, rides provided, anything else. If there are other things that you would like to measure, let us know, because we will follow up with everyone about 3 to 6 months after the materials have been downloaded and used to find out how those materials worked, how the campaign worked for you. If there are things that we could improve, that would be all good for both us to know and also for you to analyze the results and see the impact that your campaign has had in the community. And then, I'm going to go to the next slide here. So, and as I mentioned, we will be sending you a short survey just a little bit after the campaign, you've used the campaign. But this is really, we want to make sure that you, just like everyone in the community, can sit back and relax, because we definitely want, again, to challenge those misconceptions and stigma and make sure that people know that these materials and the resources that your community provides are accessible and they're easy to use, and that, again, every ride does count in the community. So now I'm pretty much done, so I'm going to turn it back on over to Virginia and Kristy to take any questions or answer anything that you might have.
All right, thank you so much, Joellen. A lot of really great information from both Virginia and Joellen, and I just have to say, being a former transit professional myself, I really wish I had this information in this campaign and these materials to use back when I was providing service. So this is really fantastic. We do have a couple of questions in the chat section, and we'll definitely take those. But I wanted to remind you guys how you could ask your questions should you have any. You have a couple of options. First, if you're in the webinar room, you can submit your question and or comment via the chat section, which is at the bottom left of your screen. You can submit that there, or if you would prefer to do it via email, or if you're not in the webinar room, then your option is to submit an email question. And you can do that by responding to the connection information that was sent out. That was sent out by me earlier today and yesterday. And so you can respond to that email with your question, and I'll make sure that that gets entered into the chat section so that the presenters can answer that. So those are your two options for asking questions. We do have a couple, and we'll get started with those. Virginia, the first two questions come from when you were presenting, and I tried to pay attention. I think they were from about slide 8 or 9 when you were talking about the results of the survey and the slides that were top tier information and bottom tier information. And the first question was, which group did you say was still primarily driving? I don't know if it'd be easy for you to remember that, but I'll let you address that, and if we need to address that separately, we certainly can.
Yeah, I would invite you certainly to take a look at the poll report, which has that specific data. But it was surprising to us that a large percentage of the older population, as well as a pretty large percentage of the younger adults with disabilities who responded, were still driving. And as a matter of fact, and if you want to talk offline about this, especially after you've had a chance to look at the poll, I invite you to do so. But the questions that were asked of caregivers certainly addressed the complexity of that situation, that many caregivers felt that the person that they were caring for had some real problems with driving. You can also see that in the presentation that we did last week on the poll in more detail, because we share a number of quotes from caregivers about their concerns about their loved ones driving. One of the things that's really interesting about that particular issue is that if you asked older adults, do they think at some point that they're going to need to stop driving? Many of them say yes, and many of them say that they're modifying their driving. And the same is true for younger adults with disabilities. But if you ask them when do they think they're going to have to finally give up the keys, the younger adults, typically we're talking about in their late 50s or early 60s. The older adults were saying, well, maybe in our 80s. So it's always sometime ahead of now. It's not right now. And I think that underscores one of the issues, which is that when people stop driving, they stop having that ready, flexible transportation resource. They fear that their lives are going to be very constrained. And sadly, in some communities, their lives are going to be very constrained in terms of what they can do and where they can go. So again, underscoring the need to get the word out on what transportation resources are available in the community.
Great, thank you so much. And then the second question from the same questioner was regarding the definition of older adult for the survey. Was there a age limit, and what they're asking is specifically what was the higher end of the age limit, if there was one identified?
The age limit we chose was 60 and older, which is the definition of older adults that is used in the Older Americans Act. So if you think about older adults, it's a very wide range. It's really multiple generations of older adults if you talk about people in their 80s and 90s. I am not sure what the oldest respondent, how old that person was. I can find that out. So if you want to send me an email at vdize, so VDIZE at n4a.org, and my email address is on the final slide, feel free to do so because I'll be glad to get that information for you.
Fantastic. And I just entered your email address into the chat section for anybody that may want to have that available, just to copy and paste. We have a comment and question from Sharon regarding let me just read it. I understand your need for measurement of impact, but many local organizations may want only to view them because we are in the preliminary stage and not ready to implement the campaign right away. And so the question is, perhaps you can make the sample materials available to view on your website without registering. And so I would assume that you would want Sharon to send an email to you and make that request, but I'll let you let her know what you think is best for her to do.
Yes, I will say this, that if we have, I think we have access to all the emails of everyone on the call, and we can certainly send the package to you all. I don't think that's a problem, Joellen, at this point. And we have talked about making it possible for you to view what's in the package of images and messages offline to just see if it's something that you're interested in, and as a further, I guess, incentive for you to actually register and use the materials. So we'll talk about that offline, and if we're unable to just send you the package, when maybe Kristy, you can share those emails with with us, and we will respond one way or the other, either to say, here's the package, or here's where on the website you can access them.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that. So Sharon, for your particular question, if you want to either respond to the connection information email that was sent out, and I'm happy to share that with N4A and NADTC, or you can email NADTC directly, which is the email address that's going to be on the very last slide of the presentation. And either way, we can get that information and make sure that you have an idea of what is possible after the presentation. So one way or the other, please send your request in, and we'll make sure that that gets to the right person. So the next question is, can we use pictures of our local people with the Every Ride Counts logo?
That's something that we had not really talked about, and I don't think, as the materials are currently constructed, that is possible. Joellen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I mean, we're certainly open to considering other suggestions, and it might take us a while to figure out how to make that happen, because it took us a while to figure out how to ensure that the materials could be customized with your local information and your logos. And we successfully did that. The images were, I will say, very carefully selected. You may notice that it includes a number of the photo contest winners that NADTC has had. It also includes some materials, some pictures that we had to purchase for purposes of the campaign, because we weren't able, among our files, to find images that we felt were truly diverse enough and reflective. As Joellen very clearly explained, we really wanted to make these materials as accessible and usable as possible by everyone. So we wanted a real diversity of people to be represented. So Joellen, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I think that it would be possible, not at this time, however. I do think we could explore creating templates for each of the materials with the same messages that we have, but templates that would allow you to add your photos. It might be a little bit more complicated. And again, as Virginia said, I would say that we would need to, that wouldn't be something that would happen right away. But I think down the road, and also as we incorporate feedback that we receive from people who have used the materials, I think that will be something that we can do. But again, not at this time. We will have to work with our designer to figure that out.
And if the person who asked this question would please get in touch with us and let us know who you are, so that we can talk with you and keep you apprised of our progress in this area. So we want to make these materials useful for you, and you know, any way that we can make adjustments, we're willing to certainly give that prime consideration.
Fantastic. And that question came from Julia. So please, Julia, please do email the NADTC separately so that we can make sure and keep that information, or keep you abreast on the information that's available. But Julia did have a follow-up question, which was regarding the people with disabilities that were used, and was there any information available also on people with mental disabilities such as dementia?
We do have, the dementia issue is a tricky one. NADTC, around the same time we were starting to work on the campaign, also did some work on dementia and transportation and caregivers of people who are living with dementia. And one of the decisions that we made early on was that we would not seek photos of anyone with dementia or their caregivers, but we used stock photos to be representative. And we did that for confidentiality reasons, for respect reasons, to ensure that unless somebody living with dementia really is comfortable with this, or their loved ones are comfortable with sharing who they are and pictures of what they look like, this is something that's a line that we don't want to cross. So you'll notice also that through our poll that we have focused particularly on disabilities that are more physical in nature, that include physical activity limitations as well as visual and hearing. And we recognize that some of the people who responded to our poll are likely to be people who are either themselves in the early stages of dementia, or who may have some other kind of mental disability, or the caregivers of folks in that situation. We don't know, and we can't identify those folks. So when I say that we've tried to be as diverse as possible, we have tried to show a variety of disabilities. There may be people depicted who have mental disabilities, but we have not identified them as such. And if you want to have further conversation about this, we do want to be as respectful and open to your suggestions as possible. So again, feel free to reach out to me and to us, and we'll be glad to have a conversation and see what we can do.
I think it's super difficult to represent people with disabilities that have hidden disabilities in photos. So I certainly understand that is a very difficult thing to do. So the next question, moving on, is regarding the benefits of the campaign outside of marketing materials. And so a separate Julia again, but a different Julia, says that is wondering what the benefits of the campaign are outside of just providing your standard marketing materials.
Well, our vision has never been just marketing. It's always been, how can we work with communities? What kind of assistance can the NADTC provide that will help communities reach out to people who may not be using the transportation services that are available, ensure that people know where to go if they have a need, educate folks about different aspects of transportation. One of the things that we've tried to get across in those, the taglines, the messages that are used, is that we know that people are sometimes apprehensive about using public transit as well as other kinds of transportation, or they may not want to ride on a bus or a small vehicle instead of having one driver transport them. And there definitely, we know there is a lack of awareness. So we think it's a very good thing to use the materials to promote your program, but really, bottom line, we're hoping that because you're using these materials and because we're making these materials accessible to you to use as you will, that they'll support your ability to educate folks, to more effectively do outreach, to reach people who are possibly homebound or who have not caught on to the fact that you've got this great transportation resource in your community. We think the materials can be used in a wide variety of ways, and we're eager to find out what your ideas are, because I figure people are creative and they have great ideas, and they're just looking for some way to carry those ideas forward and actually make it happen. And what we want you all to do with these materials is to use the materials to help you do just that.
I think that's a great way also for people to connect with the NADTC is to email and let you know how they've used the materials. I think that's always a good thing because people are so innovative to find out how they've decided to use those. So I would suggest that's a good thing to excuse me, to email the NADTC and let them know as well. So the next question is regarding translation of the materials. And the question is, are there any plans to translate any of the materials? In particular, the interest is in Spanish versions.
We have not moved that far, and though I could say that we probably should have considered that in the very beginning. So thank you for that question. Because I think it's an important question and something that we should give due consideration to.
Fantastic. So that would be another thing to then send a request to the NADTC and see if that's something that is able to happen in the future for future versions of the materials. So the next question is, were there any suggestions on reaching people that are homebound or are unable to be independent and leave their homes?
Not necessarily through these materials, although I would point out that we include social media messages, and I think those messages can be used in a variety of ways. They can be used as a mailer. They can be used to empower folks who are case managers who visit homebound folks, maybe the Home Delivered Meals program, to share particular messages about transportation. So I think while the campaign is not specifically designed to address the needs of homebound persons, we can certainly explore how they might be used to do so. So we hope that you'll look at those materials and think, okay, this particular message is missing, or that particular message is missing, and let us know what that is. Because we started out with the notion of we wanted to create something that would be as useful and usable as possible for a very wide variety of needs. That's one we didn't particularly hone in on. But again, I think this conversation has already sparked a lot of ideas for me. It's been extremely useful, and thank you for your thought-provoking questions.
And this is Joelle, and I'll jump in here to say that some of the messages are intended for, caregivers to share with the people for whom they provide care. And often, and as the poll results did show, caregivers coordinate, plan, or provide transportation for their loved ones very often. So hopefully through at least for right now, until we, I think, refine or maybe do some refinement to our messages, that could be one way that we can reach some of those homebound older adults or people with disabilities too.
And just to reiterate what Joellen has said and the importance of your question, I think to some degree we're looking to the experience of local programs in using the materials or attempting to use the materials to serve a particular need in their community, and to keep us apprised of this is needed or that's needed or this particular kind of message really needs a little bit of work. So keep these comments coming, and we really hope that as people start to use the materials, that they will give us just this kind of feedback.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And then the next question was also a similar issue in that transportation issues with regard to inter-county or crossing county lines being a problem. And so, the question being, how does someone who lives in a rural area with a doctor that lives in the next county get transportation across county lines? And whether or not that's allowed. And so certainly, Virginia and Joellen, if you want to add to that, please do. But I think that this is a very similar issue in that, there are lots of challenges with regard to that type of transportation, and certainly, providing the information that this is an issue to the NADTC, and even contacting the NADTC technical assistance line with assistance with finding transportation might be a good solution there as well. But if you have any additional comments with regard to transportation across county lines, I'll give you the opportunity to provide those.
A couple of years ago, NADTC did a trends paper, which we publish trends papers at the end of every year that we operate the center, on crossing boundaries. And it's a little paper, and but it again, we also did a webinar on that topic. So if you can't find it on our website, we use the title Crossing Boundaries for that particular issue. So feel free to check out our website for both the paper and the webinar recording. And I know that this is a very difficult issue to deal with. There's lots of turf issues involved, and lots of cost issues related, and how you share services and ensure that people don't fall through the cracks. One thing that might be considered, and I'm just throwing this out off the top of my head, is that the materials may help, in fact, to kind of open up some dialogue on these issues. Because, for example, if County A is using a particular poster or image or message to promote their services, it might be advisable for the county one over, where people in County A frequently need to go because that's where the major medical center is, to include those materials that are the same, that look the same, even though there's different contact information in the different counties. So that might be one way to begin some of the needed dialogue that can sometimes take months and even years to work out these kinds of situations. I know they're difficult, but they're really, really important because we know they seriously impact people's lives.
Great, thank you so much. And then the last question we have for right now, and I will obviously continue to watch while you answer this question, but the last one for the moment is regard to the design of the materials themselves. And the question is, was accessible design used when designing the materials?
I'm going to turn it over to Joellen to answer that question because she works most directly with our designer.
I think I will need to do a little bit of research in that. I'm not positive that, I'm not exactly sure what accessible design might mean. I know that the graphic designers we worked with on this were familiar with the needs that NADTC has, and where NADTC does make everything accessible to various communities. So I would need to check with them, but we can certainly get back to you. If you could put your email address in the chat box. Pardon, I can get back to you.
And we'd appreciate any insights that you have to share with us on accessible design, principles and approaches that we should be on the lookout for.
And I would add, this is Kristy, I would add that if there's a particular format that you need, then, providing that and making that as a request would be great. I'm not promising that the NADTC is going to be able to provide that, but if there's something that you're looking for in particular, I do think that information would be good as provided just in case. So if you do email with regard to what the accessible design format that you're looking for, then at least there would be the information available for them to look forward with regard to what to produce. So, and then we did receive another question. The question is regarding a database of transportation services, and it says, is there any chance that there is or could be a database of transportation services across the country? And we would obviously need to continually give the updated information, but I think it would be great to have a website of transportation services across the states with regard to how they function and funding, et cetera.
You know, that's a great question, and I have to say that creating such a database would be very difficult. I will say that there is a service called Rise Insight that does have a database that was particularly designed for serving the transportation needs of persons with visual impairments. But the transportation that is offered is not necessarily in every locality in the country, and it tends to be a very broad list of transportation mixed in with specialized kinds of transportation. I'd say the challenge here, and something that I've said to many audiences, is that transportation in one place is just that. It's transportation in that community. Even within a state, or maybe I should say especially within a state, you see amazing variety. For example, in more urban areas, you tend to see fixed route public transit. In some rural communities and small towns, there is no such thing as transit, as public transit, and everything in between. Volunteer services are something that are available and are used by older adults as well as people with disabilities, but they're not everywhere either. And the way in which transportation is funded is incredibly varied. I mean, there's certainly federal dollars that are designated for transportation and programs that are specifically targeted to the needs of older adults and people with disabilities. But again, they aren't everywhere. And so figuring out how to put together a nationwide database, I think it would really be difficult, if not impossible to do. And then once it was in place, if it ever was, to keep it up to date, because in some communities a transportation provider may not last. They may not be able to stay in business. And one of the reasons why they can't stay in business in some places is because they don't have enough ridership. And they have such demand for ridership that they're turning down more people than they can serve. So providing transportation is a very community-specific job. But again, it's worth talking about in terms of at least the kinds of transportation to look for. NADTC has a publication that is about transportation options, and it's meant to kind of introduce people to the kinds of things that they should be looking for, the kinds of services, and the kinds of questions to ask. And it's called Transportation Options, and it's on our website, and let us know if you have difficulty finding it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information. I don't have any additional questions either via the chat section or email, so I'll just ask really quickly if Virginia or Joellen, if you have any closing comments before I do the final closing slides for the webinar.
I would just say keep up this dialogue, because this has been, I hope you all have found this call useful. We sure have, because your questions have been really thought-provoking and helpful to us. We want to know, we hope that you'll use our materials. We hope you'll give it a try. But we also want to know what your experience is like. And we also, finally, want to know what would you find most helpful in terms of your willingness and ability to use these materials in your community. So think about that, because we really, the value of these materials is how valuable they are in one community after another. and we hope that they will help you do your job. So thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So go ahead, Joellen.
Oh, no, I was just going to reiterate what Virginia said and say thank you for this dialogue. It's been useful to us, and we will certainly take the feedback that we've received just today into how we develop future pieces, but also how we promote and work with you all as you use these pieces in your community. Thank you.
Fantastic. So thank you guys again so much for your participation. Please take a moment to complete the webinar evaluation. I'm going to email this to all of the registered participants, so don't feel like you need to write down this URL right now. I will email it to everyone that registered, but please take a moment to complete the evaluation. It's only a few questions, and it really does help us to improve future webinars and sessions as we move forward. So that will come out via email to all the registered participants within just the next little bit. But in addition to that, thank you so much for participating in the webinar today, and also please stay connected to the NADTC. You can do this either via email at contact@nadtc.org or by phone. The toll-free number is on the screen, or through the website, which is nadtc.org. So thank you so much. We appreciate your participation today and hope that you have a great rest of your day.